What's up, y'all? This is Hammer here again, back on another video. And today I'm going to be talking about the situation that has been occurring in the country of Niger. For those who may not know, Niger, of course, is a country, a landlocked country in Central Africa. And, Western media has been talking about Niger a lot for the past couple of days. I'm going to dive into Niger. And the reason why, because I truly believe that for you to understand what's happening in Niger and why America, France, and the overall collective West is obsessing over Niger, for you to really understand this, you have to understand the history of French neocolonialism, or as some will say, Francafrique, right? So we're going to get into that. And I think, after that, I'll probably dive into other areas. But let's just get into it, right? So, for those who may not know, there was recently a coup in Niger, I believe a couple of days, almost like a week or a couple of days ago, in which the supposedly, or air quotes, democratically elected President Bazoum was exposed, right? And the moment this happened, of course, you essentially have the United States, France, European powers say, this is wrong, bring him back to power. This is the destruction of democracy. Now, here's the thing. On the surface, it looks like this, right? That on the surface, it looks like, we have this quote unquote democratic elected president Niger who was exposed, and so therefore, this is wrong, and these coup plotters are evil, blah blah, right? But when you actually zoom out, what you see is that what's really going on is that although many countries in West Central Africa have been able to get their independence from France, France has been able to maintain a sense of control over these countries through neocolonialism, right? One way they do this is through the control of the currency called a CFA franc. Now, anyone who comes from West Africa, especially a Francophone country, you know this, right? Many of these former French colonies, are using the CFA franc, a currency that is still controlled by France. This essentially allows France to have control over their economies. But on top of that, France is known for staging coups in its former colonies in West Central Africa. So whenever you will have a leader who will oppose French interests, before you know it, a coup will happen. And so the question then becomes, okay, if we know that France and the United States and the West will stage coups all across the world, especially Africa, to put in place, leaders that are more to their favor, because here's what you guys need to understand, okay? Whenever you hear these Western nations talk about how they oppose dictators and they want democracy, that's the biggest lie in the world. America and its European allies have no problem with dictators, right? They only have a problem with dictators that are not aligned with the West. The moment you become a dictator that's not aligned with the West, then the moment you become a dictator that is not aligned with the West, then they'll call you a dictator. But if you're a dictator that's aligned with the West, this is an ally. They'll casually brush aside all the authoritarian regime that you rule. So what you see in African nations, right, especially former French colonies, especially, is that they have had to deal under French neocolonialism called Francafrique. Right, the whole idea is that although technically they're independent, we still maintain influence over these countries. Whether it's controlling the currency, whether it's having influence over the leaders, and it is a very, I will say, well-known open secret that the wealth that France has is because it essentially sucks up resources from its former colonies. Now, of course, all European powers do this, right? Even the United States, right? The West does, right? So America and its European powers and the collective West will just suck up resources from the entire global South. They will suck up resources and wealth from the rest of the world, right? But I think France stands out because they have the worst reputation of this, everyone, right? So everyone is like, all the European powers are robbing from everyone, but I think the French have the reputation of just doing it the worst, right? And so because of this, they understand that if there is any kind of independence, any kind of movement towards breaking away from the Francophone influence, it's a loss for them, right? And people need to understand that the coup in Niger is not happening in a vacuum. There has been a wave of anti-French, sentiments in Africa for a very long time now, right? And the reason is because, look, contrary to popular belief, a lot of Africans, especially, Africans who live in these former French colonies, they have always known that France had some kind of control over the nation. But here's the issue. Africans felt like they were trapped. After the World War II, with the Soviet Union rising up, with the Chinese rising up, right, African nations of black Africans felt like they finally had a counterbalance to the European powers. And if you look at the history, some of the biggest supporters of sort of the, independence movements in Africa were the Soviets and the Chinese. But however, because the Soviets lost, black Africans found themselves in a bad position where the same European powers that colonized them, right? The same Western powers that colonized them were now the same powers that essentially won the Cold War. And so they now had to live under American unipolar hegemony for another 30 to 50 years. And so it was very obvious that, hey, we can fight back, we can, fight the power, but it is undeniable that because America won the Cold War, the West right now is in control. I think it wasn't until recently when we started to see the rise of China, the rise of Russia, we started to see the European power decline, we see American power decline. Now that the writing is on the wall, that the era of American Western dominance coming to an end, Africans are seeing the writing on the wall and they're taking action because they see, okay, here's our opportunity. Here's our opportunity. If we let this opportunity pass us by, we may never get another chance, right? So it's not just Niger. There was a coup in Mali. There was a coup in Burkina Faso. There was a coup in, I believe, Guinea, right? So you've been having this, of course, Central African Republic already has a lot of, Wagner there. But many folks will say hammer, although the French were horrible and the Europeans are horrible, how is dealing with the Russians any better? Here's the fundamental difference, right? When you are a nation that is operating on the global stage, especially a weak nation, you cannot do everything by yourself, right? Your goal is to align with partners that essentially are promote your interests, but it's not for free. If you look at the Chinese, China essentially, aligned themselves with the West, right? Because they wanted economic development. Okay, they knew that in exchange for this, they would essentially have to bow their head by the time, as Deng Xiaoping would say. They knew that they essentially had to play a subordinate role to America for a pretty long time. They knew they would essentially have to allow American corporations to essentially use their people as cheap labor. But as long as they were able to get the technological transfers, the intellectual property transfers, and they were able to industrialize, and so be it. They got what they wanted to deal, and they're better for it. And I think for Black Africans, they recognize, nothing is free in this world, right? But the difference is that when you were dealing with the West, you were getting nothing. But when you're dealing with the Chinese and the Russians, yes, they're going to want something in return, but at least you get what you want. It's a fair exchange. And I think that's the reason why you're seeing so many countries aligning towards Russia and China. And I believe that it will benefit in the long term, right? So because France has had this neo-colonial control over its former colonies for so long, right? Now that these former colonies, the people on the ground are seeing the sort of weakening of the West, and they're sort of seeing the pendulum shift from the West towards the East, they're seeing an opportunity, and they're grabbing, and they're saying, look, we want freedom. We want to get France out of here. And that's why you've been seeing this massive, anti-French resentment, coups, French flags being burned, because they view this opportunity as a chance to finally break free from Francafrique, or I guess French neocolonialism, and they're taking the opportunity. Right, and it looks like they are succeeding, and I feel like the reason why they're resorting to these violent means is because up until now there was a hope that many of these Black African leaders could deal with this in a political matter. But ever since ECOWAS failed to get the echo through, they say, you know what? If you can't even get the echo through because France interfered, yeah, we're gonna have to go out here and take over we're gonna have to go out here and take over these streets, and that's what they've been doing, right? That's what they've been doing. But see, another thing we also need to keep in mind, right, is that it's not just that the coup in Niger represents the sort of rejection of French neocolonialism. It's also that Niger, in many ways, was a very important proxy for the West. That's the reason why I'm gonna give you an example. There was a coup in Burkina Faso. There was a coup in Mali. There was a coup in Guinea, but it didn't get as much international press. So why is that this coup in Niger is getting so much international press, right, compared to the other ones? Well, it's very simple. Although the other coups were a result of anti-French, push, right? What separates those countries from Niger is that Niger is a major exporter of uranium for France and the EU. And for those who may not know, right, France and Europe, well, the entire European continent does not have that many resources. And because they are an industrialized economy, they need resources, they need energy in order to fuel the economy. Up until recently, Russia has been the main source of the cheap energy that Europeans have used to essentially fuel their industry, right? But because of the war in Ukraine, they have had to impose sanctions on Russia, right? And so now they've had to cut off this cheap source of energy they've been relying on Russia up until now. By the way, guys, this is the reason why Germany right now is deindustrializing. Well, like, people look at them, right? People to keep in mind, Europe right now is in decline. First, we have the United Kingdom, right? They thought that leaving the EU and the Brexit thing would do them good, but now the UK is in economic decline. It turns out that, yeah, the only thing that made the Anglo-Saxons special was that they were able to punch above the weight, and now that they can't do that anymore, the real sort of set in. Right, you sort of see how the UK is declining economically. Same thing with Europe, right? Germany has been the engine of the European economy for decades. Germany is now beginning to deindustrialize. Let me say it again. Germany, the center, the sort of engine of the European economy, is now beginning to deindustrialize. Why? Because like most countries in Europe, Germany's main source of cheap energy that fueled its industries was from Russia. And now that has been cut off, right, they can no longer get the cheap energy they can no longer get the cheap energy that they have been so used to fuel their industries, right? And so Europeans have now had to rely on essentially energy and gas from America, but here's the issue. It's more expensive, which makes their industries less competitive on the global stage. In fact, even Emmanuel Macron complained about how America is taking advantage of them, right? When we were dealing with the Russians, we had this cheap energy. The Americans are forcing us to, right, push us into this conflict with Russia in regards to Ukraine. Now they force us to cut off the gas imports from Russia, and instead to import gas and energy from gas and oil, right, from America, right? But here's the reality, right? America is actually charging Europe more. Think about this. America is charging Europeans more for energy compared to what Russia was charging them, which is crazy. But yeah, so if you look at the map, right, Europe is falling further and further and further behind the United States, further behind. So it's just economically Europe is not there anymore. And so what's happened is that Europeans, right, they understand that, okay, we have been very reliant on Russian cheap energy. Because of the Ukraine war, we want to cut ourselves off from Russian cheap energy. But here's the issue. anything out of Russia, right? If we try to get oil from anywhere else, it'll be more expensive, and more expensive energy means what? Our industries will become less competitive, right? And so there was this talk in Europe about, oh, well, if we just go towards nuclear energy, we'll be fine. But here's the issue: one of the biggest right, exporters of uranium to Europe is Niger. Oh, right? Even when it comes to France, right? Oh, I think close to what, 50% of the uranium in France was being imported from Niger. I think close to almost one third of the uranium in for the EU was being imported from Niger. It's like Europe and France have been like Niger is one of the major importers of uranium for Europe and France. And recently they were talking about focusing more and more towards nuclear power energy, right? To kind of reduce the reliance on gas and oil from both Russia and other sources, and to make us more competitive. So not only is Europe right now suffering due to the Ukraine war, due to the fact that the sanctions they placed on Russia is backfiring, they are now taking another L due to the fact that Niger, right, a country which was a major, source of uranium, has now essentially gotten rid of the puppet Western government. Okay, this is why they're panicking. Okay, because this is viewed as another threat to European energy needs. But on top of that, Niger is also a place where you have a large, right, U.S. drone base. Niger is also a place where you have a large U.S. military base, French military base, right? And if you do any of your research, right, the reason why Americans are so, obsessed about staying in Niger is because the military base they have in Niger is very strategic, right? It essentially allows America to project military might across, Central West Africa. And you could say North Africa too. So, they could afford to lose Mali. They could afford to lose Burkina Faso. But to lose Niger, not only are they losing all the uranium that they've been relying on, but they're losing a very strategic position, right, that they have been using for the military. They're losing strategic military bases, right? So this is the reason why the West, right now is so obsessed with Niger compared to other African nations that flip towards Russia, or I guess away from the West. All right, because once again, people are asking me like, Hammer, why is it that this country is getting so much attention for the coup, but all the African countries? And I said, dude, once again, because Europe right now is facing an energy crisis, right? Niger being a major exporter of uranium, for it to flip is a major hit to energy security, but also because it hosts large U.S. military bases, the fear is that this new coup leaders could get America out of there, which will further reduce America's ability to project military power across the continent. Okay? So that's what it is, right? But also, it would essentially completely create a Sahel belt where literally throughout the entire Sahel will be, military juntas, right, that essentially align more towards Russia and China, of course, except for Chad, because the because Chad, right, the president of Chad was essentially put in power by the military, right? But of course, because he is viewed as a puppet of the West, he gets a pass. But nevertheless, right, what all of this represents is that the era of Francafrique is coming to an end. Okay? The era of Francafrique is coming to an end. And so, although America, I'm going to give an example. Just recently, Roger, because here's the thing, look, they went through extreme lengths to try to stop this, right? I'm going to give an example. When you had the coup in Niger, ECOWAS literally threatened to invade Niger, right? threatened to invade Niger, even though it was obvious that, the coup was really about getting rid of the Western puppet, President Bazoum, right? And I believe last Sunday was the deadline, right? And President Tinubu of Nigeria was making threats. Before the deadline, the Senate of Nigeria said, hell to no, we're not going to war with Niger. And I think there's this growing consensus now in West Africa that, wait a minute, Western powers are trying to use African states to essentially wage war on Niger. And I think the good things that the great things that a lot of West African nations have started to wake up and realize that, wait a minute, what business possible? So what you've seen is they've pulled back from the brink and they're saying, you know what, there will be no military intervention. We're going to work on diplomacy, which in my opinion is great. It's great because it means that, African leaders have learned. They have learned to be on code. Okay. And so now that the West has realized that, hey, we're not going to be able to turn back the coup. We're not going to be able to use ECOWAS as a proxy against Niger. Now you have U.S. representatives trying to talk to the coup leader. It's sad, okay? And the crazy part is this coup came at the perfect time. America right now is drawn into this conflict in Ukraine. America right now is in this geopolitical context with Russia. America right now, is facing a situation in which economically they are in decline. They're facing a situation in which the global economy is shifting away from the West towards the East. Right. Another thing is that America and the West are dealing with the fact that many countries in the global South are essentially not aligning with them. And so America is dealing with all of these setbacks. And so to have essentially Niger flip like this, so to have these African nations break out of, slowly remove the chains of French neocolonialism, it's just, you can only imagine how angry they are. But I think, in my opinion, what this tells me is what I've always known, which is that when the pendulum flips, there's nothing you can do about it, right? When the pendulum of history moves towards a certain point, you can't stop it. It is undeniable what the writing on the wall is. The writing on the wall is clear. The era of American unipolar dominance, the era of European dominance coming to an end. And everybody can see the writing on the wall. I'm going to give an example, right? I believe that in August, right? Soon, you are going to have the BRICS summit in South Africa. And I think that close to 60 countries said they would attend? That's crazy, right? And you got close to 30 countries applying to join? I mean, this is what's happening right now. This is what's happening right now. What you essentially have is you have America, which has, which was a unipolar power, which was used to having unipolar power globally. They are seeing their position being challenged in all directions. Same thing with Europe, right? Europeans, right? Europeans have benefited a lot under American unipolar power, and they're seeing their position being challenged in all directions. And so it's like they don't know how to respond. There's a reason why this coup is so perfect, because it happened literally at the perfect time where Western powers are being attacked in all different ways. So, how do you move forward, right? But I think the reason why I want to talk about it is because I wanted to provide context to what's happening in Niger, and to kind of give you an idea of really why you're seeing all these images of people in Niger celebrating the coup. Because the former president, was not really a leader. He was installed by the West. Okay? He was installed by the West. And of course, the West tried to use ECOWAS to invade Niger, and I'm happy that the West Africans woke up and realized, hey, we're not going to be a tool for white Europeans, right? So now that that's failed, it looks like Niger, the sort of anti-French coup in Niger will succeed. Okay, will succeed. I think that's great for Niger and great for the region. But people need to understand this. Okay, although African nations have suffered from neocolonialism, right? The countries that have had it the worst when it comes to neocolonialism, in my opinion, are the Francophones. They are the ones that have had to really deal with it. And I believe that what you are seeing right now in West Central Africa is a representation of, hey, the era of Francafrique is coming to an end. The era of U.S. unipolar dominance, European neocolonial dominance, right? And French neocolonial dominance is coming to an end. And by the way, it's not just happening in Africa. You're seeing this globally, right? But I'm focusing on Africa because that's typical conversation. Okay? And so it definitely, makes me happy and rejoices my heart. But of course, guys, look, that's it. All I have for the video. But you guys tell me in the chat what you guys think about what I just said, because I feel like a lot of people don't understand that a lot of the wealth that France has and Europe has, and really I will say the wealth that the wealth that resides in the collective West essentially is extracted from the rest of the world, right? The United States and its European allies would extract wealth from the rest of the world in order to enrich themselves, right? And then the continent that has had it the worst, that has suffered the most, is Africa, right? They're the best example of having your resources being extracted by the white European or the white American, and you're left with nothing. All right, and I think they've had to tolerate it because for so long they've had to tolerate it because the world has been under American hegemonic dominance. And now that the writing is on the wall that, hey, the American century, the European era is coming to an end, you're seeing folks rise up. And I'm definitely all for it. But yeah, Francafrique is over. It could take a couple of, France and America may be able to hold it for a couple more years, but it is undeniable at this point that it's over. It's only a matter of time, right? It's not if, it's when. It's only a matter of time before they get them out of there, right? Because that's just what they're going. But I think that's about it. You guys tell me what you guys think about the video. I'll definitely try to do more uploads and more live streams if I get the time to. But with that being said, y'all, I think that's about it. Like, share, subscribe, hammer out.